the time we have approximately 1 hour for if you have I don't know how much time you want to dedicate to the presentation, but we can have an hour for the presentation and then discussion, or however you prepared the schedule. So this is the plan. Most, as I said, most of the participants are online. I would ask maybe for them to listen closely to the presentation, and probably you would like to have the discussion at the end, unless you have other instructions.
No, I think that is fine, and I'll try to keep a presentation maybe a bit shorter, because 1 hour is maybe too long to
Okay.
keep people concentrated. But maybe after, when the discussion starts, there will be a need to go back to something, and
Yes.
I think maybe that's the best thing to do. So I can try to share my presentation. I will not see you probably anymore after that, but if you can confirm that you see it full screen.
We see it full screen. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I have something. Okay. Well, first to introduce myself. Good afternoon to everybody again. My name is Vedran Nikolić. I work in the Nature Conservation Unit of DG Environment in the European Commission. And this is the unit which is coordinating the implementation of the Birds and Habitats Directives and of the Natura 2000 network. I understand, well, my today's presentation is focusing on the screening under Article 6.3 of the Habitats Directive. That's the theme of the day, but of course I understand the whole training is focused also on other legislation, strategic environmental assessment, environmental impact assessment directive, and then later next week you will look into the appropriate assessment and the application of Article 6.4 of the Habitats Directive. But the overall background, of course, to the training are the challenges on how to implement renewable energy targets and massive expansion of renewables that we all know why it's happening, and how to best implement that and still protect and restore nature. That's the core question, and all these discussions are supposed to help, well, Slovenia, but also all the stakeholders involved to achieve that goal without creating additional burden and conflict. And I think I just wanted to start my presentation with a bit of a context. I think it could be useful because it's the first time I think somebody from the Commission joins the training. So I'll try to do that in the next few slides. Well, just to let you know that, of course, me and my colleagues are involved in all the current let's say, initiatives of the Commission linked to the Repower EU and to the implementation of biodiversity and climate targets. So I will mention a few of those in my presentation. But first, to start off with something that we are all well aware of, why we are talking today about the expansion of renewables. It's, of course, because we have climate crisis. Our planet is warming up. The main cause of these climate changes, as confirmed by science, is human impact, the emissions, the inability of our planet to cope with the extra CO2, and thus we have observed and confirmed warming of our climate, which has now we see catastrophic consequences to not only to our planet, to its physical world, but also to our society in terms of droughts, floods, extreme weather events, and you name it, which then cascades to all our economic sectors, including agriculture and others. So linked to the climate crisis inextricably is the biodiversity crisis. We all know that, of course, climate causes decline of biodiversity by itself. Climate change causes that, but also deterioration of our ecosystems seriously compromises our ability to fight climate change. because healthy nature is our biggest ally in fighting climate change. And unfortunately, nature is not doing well. Here are some figures that you're all well aware of, global figures on the extinction rates of animals in the last few centuries, but also in the EU, we have good data on the conservation status of birds, habitats and other species, and we know that 80% of protected habitat types in the EU are in bad or poor status. Our soils are not doing well, our wetlands have shrunk, and especially some species groups have been extremely declining. This is the EU state of play, but it's not much different if you take a look at the Slovenian data, which is regularly reported under the nature directives. Biodiversity is still in decline. Actually, we haven't been able to reverse that decline, and let alone to restore nature to help us fight climate change, but also to deliver other significant benefits to the society, because we know that many, if not all, our economic sectors, all our society depends on healthy nature and the services it provides, be it for food, for climate regulation, for recreation, for health, and so on. So we have pretty good data on what the biodiversity decline is causing in terms of damage to our ecosystems, but also in terms of cost to our society. Now, the response of the EU to this crisis is the European Green Deal. It's our new strategy, economic growth strategy, our new strategy to cope with climate changes, to transform the society into a more sustainable resource use. And in particular, 3 parts of the European Green Deal are relevant for the topic today. That is our actions on climate. You know that there is a EU Climate Pact. We have in the past few years adopted new climate laws, new climate regulations, setting our ambition to reduce CO2 emissions. We have a set of rules and initiatives to promote clean energy, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. And then as a third and unavoidably linked to the other initiatives is the one on protecting and restoring nature. And the core of the third part that I mentioned is our EU biodiversity strategy, which was adopted 2 years ago. Now, all of these are important to achieve the climate and biodiversity goals, and to achieve the European Green Deal objectives. And in particular, in the strategy, what are the most important objectives is the goals on protected areas, to expand protection of land and seas, to reach 30% of land and seas protected, to increase the areas under strict protection, but also to restore nature, not just to protect, which we know works well, but also to restore nature in all land and sea. And for that, the Commission has last year proposed a pioneering new legislation, which is called Nature Restoration Regulation. And that new set of rules is currently being negotiated between the co-legislators in the Parliament and in the Council, and we hope it will be adopted soon, because without that, we will not achieve the goals that we have set. Of course, when we talk about energy transition, one important milestone was the adoption of the Repower EU initiative. It's a plan which was triggered, of course, by the war, among other things, with the invasion of Russia on Ukraine, and all the problems that then appeared on the supply of energy. So one of the main aims was to reduce dependence on Russian gas and oil, but also to accelerate the implementation of the European Green Deal. There are 3 important pillars of the Repower EU. Often we tend to just look at the deployment of renewables. Yes, that's really the important part of this initiative, and all the new rules that are being put in place to accelerate that. But there are two other important ones which should not be forgotten. One is saving energy. There is an important scope to further save energy, be it by reinforcing the energy efficiency of buildings or in other ways. Then to diversify energy sources, not to rely just on one type of energy. And for that, the focus of the Repower EU is on expanding solar, in particular to use the space on rooftops, be it industrial or home rooftops, as an obvious place to develop renewables without much impact on nature. Well, of course, there are other parts of the Repower EU plan linked to the deployment of heat pumps and tapping into hydrogen. Now, this is all, I'm just showing all parts of the puzzle which are important as a background for discussion. The core question, of course, which we are not only discussing now in this workshop, but in all countries of the EU and with the renewables industry, with the governments, with everybody concerned, is the question whether it's possible to develop and deploy at such large scale renewable energy and still protect and restore nature. And of course, we acknowledge that this is a very difficult question to answer, because when we are not even sure at this moment what is the scale of deployment, because countries and industry keep updating the figures of how much, for example, offshore wind energy will be needed in one or the other sea basin. Technology evolves as we speak, so it's even entirely not clear what is the required capacity and what is the energy mix that we are aiming for between wind, solar, and other types of energy. But what is sure is that we are looking at massive deployment. And the main question remains whether it's possible to reconcile these objectives. And from all our thinking and analysis and the documents and strategies that the Commission put forward, we strongly believe that this is possible. It's not easy, it will be very challenging, but it's possible, and it's not only possible, but it's the only way that we can proceed. And for that, it's important to say that the legal instruments, the policy and legislation, which is in place currently in the EU, and I'm talking about all the directives that you have received training so far on the strategic environmental impact assessment, habitats directive, but also water framework directive and maritime spatial planning directive at sea. All these provide tools that enable avoiding conflicts between renewables and biodiversity. And that is, of course, if they are used properly, smartly, and timely. And I think that's where most of the challenges still remain. We are all well aware that this legislation is not always implemented properly, timely, and appropriately. And it's not only the legislation, it's all planning processes in the countries linked to deployment of renewables. But the truth is that currently, at least when we speak about the nature legislation, it allows for effective deployment of renewables and coexistence with nature protection. We have numerous examples of how this can be done with benefits for both. It's true that we also have examples on how it should not be done, but that's one way to learn from the mistakes of the past so that we can do it better and better. And just to recall, since the topic of today is the Habitats Directive and its Article 6.3, that this procedure, of course, allows projects, including renewable energy projects, to happen inside Natura 2000 sites or outside, as long as they do not harm the integrity of those sites. Even when they do, even if the project is harmful, in justified cases and exceptional cases, they can be carried out. And if it's proven that there are no alternatives and there is overriding public interest, and compensatory measures are deployed. And we will talk about it, I think, next week in detail. So just to come back to what needs to be done, we will talk today about one procedure which is required by EU law, but that itself will not fix the problem. These procedures come into play when a plan or project is proposed, and at that stage it's well, I won't say it's too late. It's never too late. This procedure is put in place to ensure that to safeguard the Natura 2000 sites. But actually, if we want to address this challenge appropriately, we need to start from scratch, from the planning stage, from the drawing board. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of strategic planning. Well, not just for renewables, of course, that goes for any type of infrastructure or intervention in nature, but in particular, when we speak about renewables and the planned expansion, the conflicts are best avoided early through good strategic planning. Of course, you need to look at the potential for certain wind energy, be it wind linked to the of course wind patterns, but also for solar, for other types of energy. The essential is to look where is the best potential to harness that type of energy, but that has to be combined early enough with information about sensitivity of species and habitats, with the appropriate places where those installations could least harm nature, so to exploit these areas and that potential first. And that is the role of sensitivity mapping that is being done now in Slovenia, but it was done before, even at certain scale. You can see it on the slide, the wind farm sensitivity map of some years ago. None of these are perfect, but there are tools about which I will speak later, which enable us to avoid these conflicts at an early stage and to plan to which types of energy and where they should be deployed. And the starting point is, of course, the climate energy plans and the needs, energy needs, but then it needs to come as early as possible together with the information about Natura 2000 sites, about other important areas for nature, corridors for migratory birds, and so on. So that's one important point to keep in mind. From our side, for years now, we have been providing guidance and support on how to best do this. It has not started with the Green Deal and the Repower in the EU. We have been supporting member states on how to develop wind energy in line with the provisions of nature legislation for a long time, and we have issued guidance documents, a specific one on energy transmission, on wind energy developments, and not only that, we have also developed this wildlife sensitivity mapping manual, which contains numerous examples from different member states on how the sensitivity mapping is best done and used for planning. So there is a wealth of information in this. I'm sure you're aware of these guidance documents. They are all translated in all EU languages, including Slovenian. So I hope you are using them in your daily work. And recently we have issued some other recommendations and assistance when the Repower EU package came in, and we are continuing to do that, including the upcoming guidance in relation to the emergency regulation, which was passed recently, and we will talk more about it next week. Now, to come to the point of my presentation, which is the specific requirements of the Habitats Directive. You have spoken about SEA and EIA. Just to say from the outset that the Habitats Directive is very specific and different from other legislation. There are lots of similarities, but there are also lots of differences in the way they are set up and implemented. So when we speak about the Natura 2000 management framework, that is governed by Article 6 of the Habitats Directive. These rules are transposed into legislation of all countries, including Slovenian national legislation, and I understand you spoke about this morning. But when we speak about Article 6, it's important to state that it's a very strong legal provision. It relies very strongly on a precautionary principle, but also it's meant to involve everybody in the process and procedures in line with the rules on public participation and access to justice, as it has been clarified by the court. There are three important parts of Article 6. They are very different. One is, well, these are the rules how to manage Natura 2000 sites. I will not repeat what Natura 2000 is. I think I hope that this was said this morning. So we have sites under the Habitats Directive, sites of community importance or special areas of conservation, and sites under the Birds Directive. And these rules that I will mention are more or less applicable to both, except for the first one. The rules of Article 6.1, which says that conservation measures should be implemented in sites which correspond to the ecological requirements of habitats and species. There is a similar article in the Birds Directive. But Article 6.2, which sets the rule that member states should avoid deterioration of habitats and significant disturbance of species, and Article 6.3, they apply to both sites, so to all Natura 2000 sites. And today we focus on the appropriate assessment of plans and projects. That is Article 6.3, and it's a very specific provision which comes into play when plans and projects are proposed and they can affect the sites. The other two provisions, they apply always, regardless, also to ongoing activities but the Article 6.3 is triggered specifically when there is a plan and project to be implemented in the site. And the main rule of this article is that plan or projects can be approved only after making sure that they will not adversely affect the sites. And well, this is, I will just skip this. So this is Article 6.3. I'm sure that you're well aware of what it says. I didn't put the Slovenian text, but basically it says that any plan or project not directly connected or with or necessary to the management of the site, but which is likely to have a significant effect, either alone or in combination with other plans and projects, shall be subject to an appropriate assessment of the effects of the plan or project on the site. And this assessment should be done in view of the site's conservation objectives. And once this assessment has been done, and in our EU jargon, we call it appropriate assessment, then the competent national authorities can only agree to that plan or project if they are absolutely sure that it will not adversely affect the integrity of the site. I have underlined and put in bold some of these very important provisions of this article. Each of them has been subject of clarification either by the court or in our guidance documents. But I just wanted to use this slide to stress that in practice, because we will talk today about screening, but that is nowhere mentioned in the directive. This screening stage has come about as a practice on how to implement this article, and of course it's in line with other legislation on impact assessments. So this first part of the first sentence is in fact the screening, and the screening entails actually checking. Well, first we have to have a plan or project, and then to checking whether it's directly connected or necessary to the management of the site, whether it is likely to have a significant effect, either individually or in combination. And then the outcome of the screening determines whether the second part, the appropriate assessment, should be done or not. So that's just to stress this, how this came about in practice in member states, and that's how it's done in Slovenia. And we have provided, like I said, numerous interpretation guidance on this specific article, including on screening. And I hope that you're aware that we have first our general interpretation guidance, that is this document on the right, which looks at whole Article 6, 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. And this has been revised and updated in 2018. So that's most up-to-date version. And then relatively recently in 2021, we have updated our methodological guidance document on Article 6.3 and 6.4, which looks more into the methodologies and experiences from member states, how in practice they have implemented this article, including screening. These both guidance documents should be read together. They contain most up-to-date court case law, experience in implementation. It has been consulted with member states, with stakeholders. So it actually contains all the best current understanding of the Commission, but also of all of us together on how to best implement these provisions. And it's aimed to assist everybody from the authorities, but also developers, consultants, other stakeholders in the implementation of these provisions. Now, this is something that you must be aware of, this diagram, which looks at how this all these rules work. The screening phase, the three main stages, the screening, then the main or appropriate assessment, and then as a third one, the possibility to implement the plan or project under certain conditions, even if it has been shown that it has significant negative impact. But let's take a quick look. So the first main stage is screening. The main question is, are there likely significant effects, and is appropriate assessment necessary or not? If it's not necessary, you go immediately to the authorization of the project, and the project can be implemented. If there are likely significant effects, and it means that you need to go to the second stage, which is the appropriate assessment. If the appropriate assessment shows that there will be no adverse effects on the integrity of the site, then again, the authorization can be granted. If the plan or project will have significant negative effects, then the authorization must be refused, so there is no permit. But under Article 6.4, there is still a possibility for the developer, after the appropriate assessment, to request to proceed with the projects. But then there are some important checks to be done, whether there are alternative solutions, whether there are imperative reasons of overriding public interest, and well, if the other conditions for the project are fulfilled. And I will not talk about this today because we will have another day to discuss that. But our main focus is this first part, the screening, and the questions which are asked under this first part. So this is the overview of some important elements of screening procedure. The core question is to examine the likelihood of a plan or project to have a significant effects of the site, to check whether there are in combination effects with other plans or projects. And this has to be done, the conclusion has to be reached beyond any reasonable doubt, if we are talking about exclusion of such significant effects. If there is a doubt, then we need to go to the full appropriate assessment. So I will repeat this in the next slide. But just below, we have main differences between the screening and the next stage, which is the appropriate assessment. So if you look at the first row, in the screening stage, it's very simple. We are simply looking at the likelihood. Is the project likely to have significant effect? While in the appropriate assessment, we look into those effects in detail, and we assess whether there are really adverse effects on the integrity of the site. So the first is the mere likelihood, and the appropriate assessment is a detailed assessment of those effects, if they are likely, of course. Now, one important characteristic of the screening is this likelihood versus certainty. So to trigger the appropriate assessment, it's sufficient to have the likelihood of significant negative effects. But to conclude that there are no significant effects, there has to be certainty. And that's, of course, the precautionary principle. In the appropriate assessment, of course, there's the same principle, but then it's on another level where we look in detail into the effects, and the plan or project can be authorized only if there is certainty about the absence of adverse effects. Now, one important difference between the screening and appropriate assessment is the time necessary to perform it. Screening is usually very fast. The answer to this question, are there likely significant effects, is typically very quick assessment. It's based on existing data, knowledge and experience, expertise, our knowledge on the typical effects of a project on a site, and the conclusion can be reached fairly quickly. If there is any doubt, you are required to proceed to the appropriate assessment. The reason for this is also to allow projects for which we are certain that they cannot have significant effects to proceed quickly. So in screening, we just take a look. Okay, if we are sure that there are no significant effects, the project proceeds quickly. If there is a doubt, or we just proceed to the appropriate assessment. And then typically the appropriate assessment takes more time. It's a more detailed examination, often requires additional field surveys, research, expert assessments, and so on. One important difference between the two, not the only one, but here I singled out just important differences, is that mitigation measures, so measures to reduce the impact of the project on the Natura 2000 site, must not be considered in the screening stage. They can only be proposed, imposed in the appropriate assessment stage. The reason for this is very simple. In the screening stage, we are looking at the likelihood of significant impacts. We are not yet examining them in detail. So it's not possible in the screening stage to deduce any good conclusions on what mitigation measures could be appropriate, because we haven't examined the effects in detail. That comes only later. So an attempt to mitigate already the impacts of the project while they are not fully understood in the screening stage is not allowed, and that has been clarified by the court. I'm just checking back. Do you find it useful that I finish the whole presentation, or that we maybe break at certain moments for just some clarification questions? I think it's maybe best that I proceed towards the end.
I agree, Vedran, unless you would like to do it other way.
No, I think it's fine like this. Okay, so I'm drawing now these examples from our methodological guidance. You can find them all inside. What are the typical steps to do the screening? And this is mainly true for all, well, a lot, if not all, EU countries, how it's done. There are some important steps which correspond to the questions which are asked in this first sentence of Article 6.3. And the first step is to conclude if the plan or project is directly connected with or necessary to the management of a Natura 2000 sites, because those plans and projects do not have to undergo an appropriate assessment, because they are essential, they are necessary to improve the condition of the habitats and species in the site, and by definition they are not meant to have a significant negative impact. So the first stage is to examine this, and immediately to say here it doesn't mean that everything which is meant to implement conservation measures in the site is automatically excluded in this step. Typically, yes, the measures listed in the management plan of the site, the conservation measures, they are created, they are designed to improve the condition. But it's not always the case that they can be automatically excluded, because there can still be some components of those projects and plans which, even though they are meant to improve the condition, can have some negative effects. And a typical example here is for example, in forestry, we often have the situation in member states that the forest management plan, so a management plan for forests in that area, is at the same time a Natura 2000 management plan. So it implements the measures to conserve forest habitats, but it also regulates exploitation. It's often the case. And in that case, if you have a forest management plan with many different components, including conservation measures, leaving dead wood or certain stages of the forest intact or things like that, obviously these are conservation measures for habitats and species. But at the same time, these management plans can contain harvesting of timber, they can contain forest roads, they can contain different elements which could have a negative impact. And in that case, at least these components will have to undergo the screening and possibly appropriate assessment. There can be other examples as well. So it's always a case-by-case assessment, what can be excluded, because it corresponds to the plan or project which is necessary to the management, and which parts of such plan need still to be examined. Now, when this is done, then we move to step 2, and that is typically looking at the description of the plan or project. What is it? What kind of intervention? And since this screening is often done together with the environmental impact assessment screening, of course, we use the same information about the characteristics of the project. Is it construction? What it is? What is the size of the plan? And then the possible effects of it, impacts, physical and others. And of course, this is well developed usually in the countries how this is done. Step 3 is to identify which Natura 2000 sites may be affected by the plan or project. Of course, looking at its characteristics, at its potential impacts, how wide-ranging they are, and what type of impacts. One needs to identify how far these impacts are going, how many Natura 2000 sites are affected. Of course, it's not the same if you're building a factory, which is a kind of a static impact. Well, it can have also some emissions. And if you are building something on a river, which can then carry the impacts sometimes 100 kilometers away, or if you're building a barrier, which can have impacts also hundreds kilometers away. So it's important to look at the characteristics of the project to determine the scope of the screening, how far does it have to go. And then the most important part, assessing whether there is really likely significant effects on those sites or not. Some type of tools which can help in determining all these things, in particular which Natura 2000 sites may be affected, were developed, and we often use the same examples. And I put some web links here on the page. Those are tools developed by the German authorities or Irish authorities. These are dedicated tools, including IT tools, for conducting appropriate assessment, which enable the authorities to make some simple, measurements and conclusions on distances of the project from the site, on the waterways, on the and to do it all in a GIS environment. These tools also typically, and we'll talk about it later, enable you to look at cumulative impacts, because often previous projects are directly put in the tools so that you can see everything in one place. These tools also are kind of decision tools sometimes, that you answer some questions and then it leads you to the conclusion. So I just invite you, if you're not familiar yet with these examples, to explore them. And there are more examples in our guidance document. But the bottom line is that all these examinations and screening steps should lead in the end to a conclusion. And that should always be an official and well substantiated and underpinned decision of the competent authorities. We have some templates, and I'll show it later what this decision could contain, but it should contain justifications for the conclusion. One important thing why this decision needs to be official, underpinned, is to ensure also access to justice, which exists to this type of decision. So the ability for NGOs or any other interested party to challenge decisions of the competent authorities. But another important reason is also to enable public participation, because public is entitled also in the screening stage, but also in the appropriate assessment stage, to take part in the decision making. And therefore, these decisions typically cannot be just one sentence. You know, the appropriate authority has concluded that there will be no impacts on the site. They have to be well motivated, explained, so to allow checks to be done. Now I will just spend a few slides to explain some important concepts, which are important both for screening but also later for the appropriate assessment. And that is, what do we consider plans and projects when we do the assessment? And as you know, many of you, there is no definition of plan or project in the directive itself. There are some definitions in the EIA directive, but the court has actually clarified that it goes well beyond what the EIA directive set as the meaning of project. And essentially, to keep things very simple, it can be everything. Well, not really everything, but the important trigger for the appropriate assessment in the screening stage is whether this intervention can have a likely effect on the site. And really, the court has supported a very broad meaning of plan or project. Of course, typically, spatial plans, land use plans, sectoral plans like forestry plans or any other plan, those fall in the scope of plans. Plans such as policy statements like strategies usually do not fall under this, but of course it's always case by case. When we speak about projects, that there it's maybe more clear, all interventions in the environment fall under that. It's not only constructions. Court has actually clarified in one case that even intensification of livestock could be considered as a plan or project. So it's really broad. It also includes activities which are carried out periodically, but are licensed periodically, like water regulation, like fishing, which is licensed periodically. Generally done activities which are usually done are also under the scope. The size of the project is really not relevant. The location of the project as well. The project does not have to be inside the site. It can also be outside. Like I said, if it's on the river and the site is downstream, there can be projects which can have effect hundreds of kilometers away from the site. There's more to it, but those are the main things on what plans and projects should be considered. One important thing to say here is that if you do an appropriate assessment and screening and appropriate assessment at the plan level, for example, plan for renewables or wind energy plan, it does not mean that you are exempted from to do all that again at the project level. Now, how do we determine if there is a likelihood of significant effects? I already said an important element of screening is a precautionary principle. The mere likelihood of the effects triggers the appropriate assessment. You have to be certain beyond reasonable doubt and with good explanation underpinned strongly by evidence to conclude that there is no likelihood of the effects. So typically the court has said in case of doubt, if there is absence of significant effects, you proceed immediately to the appropriate assessment. And this has been confirmed many times. And in a way, it makes things easier for the authorities. So if there is a doubt, you just proceed with the appropriate assessment. It doesn't mean that you always have to do it. Sometimes you can really prove with certainty that there will be no effects. What type of assessment then looks at likelihood and significance? Well, first, like I said, it's not important if the plan or project is either inside or outside. It's not even important if it's in another country. Yes? If a site is in another country, still the authority which implements the project should look into the effects to the sites in another country. For example, you're implementing a project on a river and it will have an impact on the site right across the border. There are mechanisms, of course, to do transboundary consultations and to conclude on these effects. The definition of significance is explained in our guidance as well. It's not just any arbitrary definition. It's always case by case. It is related to the specific habitats and species present in the site. And I will immediately, I think, proceed to how this is done. The significance of impacts has to be linked to the specific conservation objectives in the site. So it's linked to the species and habitats, to their ecological structure, function, processes, and so on. Typically, this is later the actual impacts are done and explored through field surveys and so on. But in the screening stage, we also have to have an idea of what are possible significant impacts. And the countries have developed various ways to measure and estimate whether a significant impact is above the threshold of significance or not. And a typical example, which we always mention, is, but it's not the only one, but it's actually a good one, is how it's done in Germany, where they have developed an extensive guidance and with some concrete numerical thresholds of first permanent loss of some habitat types, and above these thresholds, such permanent loss is considered significant. Or if when the level of loss could be insignificant for some habitat types under certain conditions. So here typically you see some habitats, some forests, meadows, and so on, with the level of loss which can be considered significant or not. Typically, under these examinations, a relative area of loss of less than 1% in the site is considered insignificant. Of course, this includes cumulative losses as well. But just to say a word of caution, this all, of course, is a rule of thumb. It's an approximation. These types of examinations with such thresholds are never absolute, and even in the German example, these are still intended as guidance. It's a starting point, meaning that the authorities still have to do a case-by-case approach, looking at each project and each habitat when they apply these thresholds, and to verify if they are really appropriate or whether such loss can still be considered significant, bearing in mind the condition of the habitat in the site and so on, and especially cumulative effects. And often there is uncertainty related to the estimated loss, especially in the screening stage. So extra precaution is advised, and such thresholds cannot simply be just applied as a general rule, especially in the screening stage, because of the uncertainty which is related to this type of examination. One important thing which I don't think we have maybe talked in the past when we had this type of trainings, but which increasingly is being discussed in the countries as a consequence of some court rulings and our interpretation guidance, is the importance of assessing the significance of impacts in relation to the site-specific conservation objectives of the site. You know that each site has to have not just measures in place, but those measures need to be able to lead to the achievement of the conservation objectives in the site. You know that the directive has a general aim of achieving favorable conservation status of habitats and species, and that general aim is translated in the for each site into the so-called site-specific conservation objectives. So what do I need to achieve in terms of species abundance and quality of species habitats, or area and condition of the habitat, to contribute to that overall goal? What is the role of the site, each site, in the overall objective? And this is done through these site-specific conservation objectives. And these objectives are necessary to perform the appropriate assessment, because they are mentioned there in the text. So typically, as you can see on the slide, these objectives need to be site-specific to relate to each species and habitat which is protected in the site. They have to be quantifiable, measurable whenever possible. They had to be comprehensive to include all the important elements of ecological requirements, of the condition of what should be achieved in the site. They should be consistent for all sites. They should at the same time be realistic, something that can be achieved ecologically and in other ways in the site. And they should specify whether the aim is to improve the condition and area, or just to maintain it. And this is important when one considers the effects of a plan or project. This is an example. Yeah, there are many examples, both good and less good ones of the site-specific conservation objectives. Here again, one often reasonably good example is the Irish example of how they set the objectives for their sites. And there's one on the left for beech forests. First, the objective, it has to be clear whether it's to maintain or improve the condition. If it's just to maintain, then of course you're looking at the status quo and the impact of the project. We look whether the surface will be reduced, whether the condition will be reduced. If not, then well, it could go ahead. But if the objective is to improve, to extend the surface area of the habitat, to improve the condition, then you can say that if the impact of the project is even to slightly reduce the surface of the habitat, it goes against the conservation objective. Its impact is significant. Even if it's a little bit, it prevents the achievement of the conservation objective. So it's important what you actually want to achieve in each site. And these objectives need to be spelled out in terms of attributes and targets to be achieved. Whenever possible, they should be numerical. It's not always possible, but at least when we speak about surface of the habitat, it should be clear how many hectares or square meters of the habitat need to be present in the site or are expected to be restored to. Then when we look at habitats like forests, usually there are characteristic key species that need to be present there in a certain abundance. It's also the case with meadows, grasslands, certain canopy level, certain height of trees, age. Then other species which are associated, characteristic species of the underlayer in the forests, like the ones that are listed here. The fact that some other non-indigenous species should not be present there, the dead wood volume that should be left for species to thrive, and so on. So typically these are the conservation objectives against which then the effects of the project, including in the screening stage, are examined. And one of the last things that I wanted to speak about is the cumulative impacts, because that is also an important element in the screening. So it's not just the likely effects of the project or plan that we are examining that has triggered the assessment, but the impacts of that project need to be looked at in the context of other plans and projects. Because the small impacts of one project, when taken together with other projects, can lead to significant impacts, and you know that cumulative impacts tend to amplify the impact. So this also is an important effect that needs to be considered. What plans and projects need to be addressed in assessing cumulative impacts? That has also been clarified. So certainly it's the plans or projects which have already been completed. And I said some of these tools implemented, for example, in Ireland, in the GIS already contain plans and projects in space, which have already been completed. But then not only these projects which are in the course of being approved, for which the competent authority has received the applications and also need to be examined, and those should be known to the authorities. And some systems in some member states make it easy with the digitalization for the central authorities or any authority to know which projects have been applied even at the local level. So these projects which are not completed but have applied for consent should be included. And these databases or dynamic maps are a very important IT tools to facilitate the task of the authorities. And of course, this assessment of cumulative impacts is not restricted to the assessment of a similar type of plan or project, like not only wind farm with wind farms. Of course, it could be wind farms with energy transmission, with all other interventions and projects that are being planned or done. And typically the result of this screening, although I said it's a very quick procedure, so if in doubt, you just proceed, it's important to note these considerations in a report, which is typically attached to a decision, or it's elaborated in a decision how the conclusion has been reached. So this is an example from Italy, where they note through chapters some answers to some typical questions. And if you look at the end, the result of the screening is either positive, so the project is screened out, no need to go to the appropriate assessment, it can be approved, or it's negative, the appropriate assessment is needed. So it has to be absolutely clear what is the conclusion, and the underpinning needs to be contained there. And I finish with less good maybe topic, but the one I'm sure will trigger and feed into our discussion. And what are the typical implementation issues that we encounter? You know that these obligations are for member states to implement. It's for member states authorities. It's for the national courts to control them. But we also have a role. You know, the Commission is always first trying to assist the countries. We are not only looking at using the stick. We are here to help, and that's why we have all the guidance documents. But when necessary and when it's brought to our attention, we can also correct the mistakes, including through legal action. So through many court cases, and there have been tens and hundreds of them, we have found out and are still finding out, although I can tell you that the infringement cases on Article 6.3 and on bad implementation of screening and these other provisions are declining. We have less and less of them as the authorities have built an important experience in implementing them, and the courts are doing their job in member states. But here are some of the typical issues which still pop up and which have been dealt with by the Court of Justice in the past. So first is trying to avoid in general any kind of assessment. This is very rare, and we rarely see that a project is being stamped and approved without even being considered by the authorities, even for screening. I cannot, well, think of such case. Maybe here when we speak about that, and maybe for the countries such as Slovenia and Croatia, it's important to say that, for example, the projects which may have been approved, I don't know if there is such any cases in Slovenia anymore, but which may have been approved before the accession to the EU. Of course, they are not subject to the appropriate assessment. They were approved under a legal regime which didn't have EU rules still in place. But in case these projects, for example, were not done, and we have some, for example, some examples where there were wind projects approved before the accession, but the technology has changed and simply they were not done. And now after the accession, the EU rules are in place. The project comes back with change of scope. So it's a new project. It's a completely like higher wind turbines, a different thing. It has to undergo the assessment. It cannot rely on the assessment which was done before the accession. So here the project, the new project, which is maybe a modified old project, needs to again be screened and so on. So maybe that's one special situation which I'm not sure it can happen still. Now, other typical mistakes are not assessing the projects which are outside the site, but which affect it. Like I said, there are such situations. If the effects, potential effects on species or habitats are not assessed in the light of best knowledge and science, if the effects are assessed, like I said, on the status quo, so the current condition in the site, and not on the conservation objectives, which often require improvement. The lack of consideration of cumulative impacts, what we call salami slicing, so looking just at the project in isolation and not looking at the other projects. Wrong interpretation of plans and projects necessary for the management of the site. Simply saying, my forest management plan is at the same time a management plan for the site, so I don't need to assess it, even if it contains forest roads. And then, like I said in the beginning, if you still remember, one mistake that we still maybe sometimes see is considering mitigation measures in screening phase, reaching a decision saying, well, there are some impacts of the project, but with these mitigation measures, it's fine and it can be screened out. That typically is wrong because, like I said, you cannot fully understand and consider mitigation measures in the screening stage. And for all these reasons, and particularly when we talk about renewables and planning renewables, I have to underline the benefits of early screening. What does it mean, early screening? It's not done often, and we want to emphasize the benefits of it. Early screening means doing screening even when not everything is being decided on the plan or project. When it's, well, sufficiently mature to say something in the screening, but it has not been finalized and really finalized and submitted to the screening when everything has been set up. This means, for example, if there's a plan to develop wind energy, or even if it concerns a certain project and not all details on the technology are yet being decided, you can still do screening. It can tell you something important on the expected likely effects, and it can give you a signal that some modifications can be done. It, of course, depends on the developer, on the capacity of the authorities to do it. And then, of course, if it's useful, it means that, well, when the plan or project is finalized, it still has to undergo screening and it may need to be adapted. But we have seen in some countries that this early screening, which you can also say is a form of consultation of nature authorities before the plan or project is being done or finalized, is very beneficial. And I think that's all I wanted to say. So you see, it has been a mix of, policy explanations why we are doing this, and the screening, of course, plays a key role in checking if the plans for renewables are likely to affect the sites, which we want to avoid. So to keep our biodiversity healthy and to help us fight climate change, at the same time to have renewables, but it cannot perform this role alone. So coming back to what I said on strategic planning, the only way that this can work is if from the outset, from the first, renewable plans, climate and energy plans, the nature authorities with their knowledge and capacities are involved in the planning. And then, of course, these procedures, the screening, the appropriate assessment, the SCA and EIA, they will perform their role, but they cannot replace these early involvements and strategic considerations that need to be made. So that's my main message. And I know there has been many details said, and some concepts may not be clear to everybody. So I'm back to you and to say what's next. Thank you.
Thank you, Vedran, very much for this extensive presentation. While the participants are gathering their thoughts and maybe preparing some of their questions, I will just mention that I'll put a short quiz into launch, so that we can have it in the background for those that will not provide any questions. But at the same time, I invite any participants, be it either physical or online, to raise their hand and actively pose any question that might pop up during this presentation.
I think there was a coffee break also planned at some stage, so I think it will be appreciated by everybody, but we can do it later as you wish also.
Yeah, we wanted to make the most
Sure.
efficiency of your time, to not have you wait on the call. So
okay, I'm here for you this afternoon. So.
Yeah, so we have a question here from the physical audience.
So I would like to ask about the case in Croatia, so the wind power plants and siting in Croatia regarding the Habitats Directive. Is there any court ruling from the European Commission already on this case?
Yes, we really cannot comment on the ongoing cases. I hope you understand that. That's the rule and policy. So of course you are well aware of this case. It has been publicly announced. We announce all our infringement decisions in our press releases, but the Commission has issued a reasoned opinion against Croatia for its failure to implement appropriate assessment in the right way concerning some wind energy projects. And we are at this stage now. There hasn't been application to the court or court ruling. But what I mentioned earlier is the lesson drawn from that experience, which may relate indeed to the some situations in Slovenia. I said I'm not sure because Croatia acceded the EU later than Slovenia, but I just wanted to emphasize, and we have this in the in our guidance as well. It's not related only to this example of issues linked to wind farms in Croatia, is that any plan or project which is being modified has to undergo then again an appropriate assessment, screening, and if necessary an appropriate assessment to make sure that it doesn't negatively affect the site. Same goes for the plans or projects which are extended, for which the license is extended. We have many such examples, industrial installations often have to have their permits renewed. I don't know, quarries, things like that. All these permits which are renewed typically have to be seen as a new plan or project each time that the permit is renewed. So each time that entails a new assessment. So that's a bit of a general message from from the example that I mentioned.
Well understood. Thank you.
Okay. We have someone from the Sabina. Go ahead.
Yes, hello, Vedran. Thank you for a very good presentation. I'm always fascinated by how easily you can present such very complicated questions. My question is whether it is possible to exclude screening with the legislation. We heard that some countries did this in some sort, but did I understand you correctly that even though they put this into the legislation, they still have to assess case by case? So it's not like it cannot be ruled out, this screening.
Yes, well, first on the presentation, where we do our best, but actually I remember from one of the previous trainings that we had in Slovenia, I don't know if it was you exactly. I was impressed actually by this, the way you explained mitigation versus compensation or somebody, I don't remember who, with this example of the road, and so I think you have some very good.
Tina.
Yeah.
Tina
I remember.
Klemencic.
I wanted to steal that. I forgot to steal it. But anyway, yeah, it can be difficult to explain these somewhat complex things. But if you break them into pieces, they are relatively simple, each of the piece. So it's when you have to do all this together, and when you have uncertainty and the lack of data, that this becomes difficult. But we have guidance on how to deal with these things too. So to come back to your question, the court said it's not possible to exclude on a general level any type of plan or project from the appropriate assessment. That has been confirmed by the court. But we know that some countries, and then we speak about details, and of course we do this conformity check of legislation as much as we can, but we can never exclude that there is some provision somewhere which is dancing on the borderline of things. But the general principle, yes, there are some countries which say even have certain distances built in. I think you in Slovenian legislation have something similar like that, saying that if a project is at a certain distance from the site or certain types of projects, but then it should, and it is normally linked with some kind of safety provision, which says nevertheless, if it has still can have negative effects, then it has to be considered. So in that case, it's fine. It's always good to have some orientations that help authorities to deal with this. Like I mentioned in my slides, these thresholds, they're all very useful as assistance. But in the end, it is the responsibility of the authorities to reach the decision, and you have to be sure. So this can only be as a guidelines, and we always insist whenever we are faced with these questions and when we check the legislation that there is this clause which says, nevertheless, if there exists any significant impacts, regardless of those conditions that are set as a guidelines, then you need to examine them. So I don't know if we are talking about Slovenian legislation or this is a question in general. The important thing is how it's also applied in practice. Like I said, anybody can challenge these decisions or should be able to challenge in front of the court. So I think it's wise and also not just on behalf of authorities, but also on behalf of developers which don't want their project to be blocked or challenged in the court and to be delayed, that these things are applied as they should. So these types of considerations, conditions, types of projects which normally would not have an impact, they are useful, but in the end you are responsible to make a check whether they still could have an impact and sign it in the end. So that's
yeah, thank you very much. I have another question. What do you think about screening when we have plans for sanation, when Natura was kind of, habitats were kind of destroyed? What in this case?
Well, like I said, the Article 6.3 excludes from the assessment the plans and projects which are meant directly or related or necessary to the management of the site. Now, if it's restoration of a habitat, by definition, it should be excluded unless, and that's we always come back to this case by case, unless that intervention could entail also some negative effects. We have typical examples from the countries where doing something good for one habitat is bad for the other, and then it needs to be assessed, or if doing something in one site somehow affects the other one, even if the measure is very positive in one site. There have been these situations and conflicts where you are restoring one habitat and that's not good for the other. And there the appropriate assessment might be necessary. So an initial consideration is to exclude it, but you still need to check whether there's a possible likelihood. And that's the role of screening. Really, if you immediately see that if you are digging a river, to put it back to the natural state. It was a river which was made into channel, and you have an objective to restore a part of the river. Fine, but it might create some digging and resuspension of sediment can still affect something. So you need to check. Even though it's a positive measure, it can have an impact during works or whatever. So there's no one answer to that question.
And also, if I understood you correctly, if we have any doubt about whether we should go ahead with appropriate assessment, then we should do it. Right?
Yes, that's the the court has confirmed in many times this very strong threshold of proving the absence of significant impact. So it's as in the appropriate assessment beyond any reasonable doubt. So when you are excluding, you have to be certain. Well, of course, to the extent that the current science can support that there are no significant effects. Typically, I think I would say in 99% of the cases, this is a very easy call. And I think for renewables, especially if you have a big plan for renewables at the national level, typically you cannot exclude those impacts in screening. It will always go to an appropriate assessment. I don't think anybody can conceive it possible to exclude big projects, big plans in the screening stage. The trick is when you have some really small scale projects. Again, I said size is not important, but often, or a new technology where you don't know, then typically you tend to decide, if you don't know about the negative impacts, then maybe it's okay, but that is wrong. Then if in doubt or if the knowledge doesn't exist, you have to proceed so that the knowledge can be gathered, so that you can find out what are the possible impacts of that type of technology. And we had some discussions, especially with renewables. What about new technologies? Can you allow a project not knowing the impacts and then you still measure them later and see whether it's fine or not? And typically we have that in the ocean energy with the wave and others where it's not well understood. And that's challenging, for example. That's challenging. And we always say, well, you don't have to test that technology in Natura 2000 sites. There's like plenty land and sea out there to test the new technology. And if you really want to do it in the Natura site, then it will really be difficult with lots of conditions to be imposed. So you don't have to make it difficult for yourself. That's why I said the strategic planning is useful, because you don't make it necessarily difficult for you by putting all the projects inside Natura 2000 sites or in places where they can be effective.
Yes, thanks. And my last question concerns exactly this new legislation on RIS, which is connected to what you just said, to this pilot cases. And also, I would like to ask you what you think about this. How will this be doable? What implementation challenges do you see maybe? And also I would like to ask you what do you think about EA being excluded for go-to areas?
Yeah, there has been a lot said about the both pros and cons of what was proposed, and well, you know, the main rationale is that you do only a strategic environmental assessment, and then the individual projects, if they are in go-to areas, meaning outside Natura and all the other important areas, then you don't need to do a project assessment. And we think that honestly that could lead to some problems, implementation problems in the end. Because that's an important check. The project level is an important check, but that's, you know, the way we have it now adopted, and we will see how it works. You know, we are making also a guidance document on this, so maybe we can touch upon it even in the day when we will speak about the overriding public interest and all these new provisions of the emergency regulation. And we have Stefania with me, who is more knowledgeable about, you know, what we expect and how our guidance will address these issues. So we can come back to that. But yeah, we are all well aware of what these new provisions could bring for accelerating, although we have doubts as well about the real effects of it. It remains to be seen, because what the industry tells us is that this for them is not such a big, let's say, help, because they have many other issues and obstacles than, you know, the simple time of permitting or environmental impact assessments. There are, of course, as you know, always other considerations about you know, locations and ownership and land use and all other issues which are not solved by these, you know, repower and emergency regulation and the future RED directive. So of course it may help, but it will also depend on what countries will do on other fronts.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Vedran.
Great exchange of the views. Would someone like to follow up on that, or maybe ask or bring up another topic? Yeah, okay.
So I have another question. It is regarding the salami slicing with the aim to reduce the cumulative impact effects. So if I remember correctly, during the screening process, you have to also take into account other plans and projects. So how can we best ensure like the transparency of the data, so that like multiple investors actually provide the accurate data and not try like to hinder or hiding data in order to reduce the cumulative impacts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like I said, some countries have put in place these databases and IT and GIS tools. It's usually useful for very big countries where these implementation of these provisions has been delegated to regional or even local authorities, which is the case also in Slovenia, as I understand, for some regional. So in that case, these authorities enter the permit requests for any project or plan into such database, and it's immediately seen by all other authorities. And I think that's really one of the best practice examples, because then you cannot kind of hide. You're not behind of any application. You can immediately see all the applications from developers, which you have to take into account in the cumulative assessment. Like I said, all projects, at least those which have applied for permit, need to be considered. Maybe your question was more about what about those which on purpose have not, you know, been applied for the permit, and the project was sliced into 10 pieces with the intention to apply one by one. Well, at first, I think it's useful that the authorities have some kind of system to fight this. Often many projects are implemented by the government, so we expect at least that the big infrastructure projects like roads, energy infrastructure are not sliced into pieces intentionally, so that little pieces of road are applied in consecutive years. In that case, the authorities will have the knowledge that something is planned in a certain corridor, so they will be able to assess it. The private little projects, that's maybe more difficult, but I would argue that salami slicing in that case is very risky for developers themselves, because if you slice your projects into pieces, then you enter a high risk that at some point your project will be refused because it have reached the threshold of impact, and it will simply be refused, a little part of it or a component of it. So I think salami slicing, it has been proven time and again that it's not useful for anyone in the end, because you just enter into problems. Still, we see it happening sometimes, whether intentionally or just by coincidence. So I think developing a robust system, digital one, online, modern one, is something which is worth investing into. It can often be transparent. These systems in some member states have been open to consultants as well, so that those doing, preparing the studies for appropriate assessments can access that information themselves early, so that they can say something about cumulative impacts while doing, the study for the developer. So I think all these good things, the more you are able to implement them at the national level, the better it will be for everybody.
Great, thank you.
So, any other question from the audience? If not, maybe Vedran, from my side, you mentioned that if the result of screening shows that there is no impacts, then the project does not need to go through other assessments, if I'm correct. Are there any real examples that you are aware of where this happened? Because I can hardly imagine for something like this to happen in Slovenia.
You must have, I don't know if Sabina or somebody has the statistics, but I think even in Slovenia, lots of projects are screened out, and I think we have this somewhere. I'm sorry, I don't have it now. I can maybe bring it up some other day. I can search for it, because we have looked into this across the countries and in the EU. Lots of projects are screened out. That's the jargon, meaning approved in the screening stage. In many countries, actually in some countries a substantial part, and that may be linked to the fact that they are screening a lot. They're screening everything. So a typical example, you would be even a chicken house. I'm just being now trying to be funny, but yeah, things like especially agricultural objects like pig farms, little ones, and so on. But even some small buildings, even in built areas, are often subject to screening, and they're screened out because some of them indeed cannot have an impact. It's always case by case, but it's typically that the smaller projects are screened out. True. And yeah, I don't know if I see Vesna has raised her hand. Maybe you have some data on the screening and outcomes of screening. I remember seeing it somewhere.
Yes, we have data. Many projects are screened out, especially small. But I would like to focus here because it's a workshop on renewable. So I will give you data on renewables in 3 years or 4 years timing. We have 72% screened out. That means that they were small project. Not on Natura 2000 site, far away from them, away from water areas, from sensitive areas, from wetlands, out of woods, especially on some degraded areas. And this we screened out. All is on the internet also. But this is a good case how to find the areas which are potential for renewables, but not without any negative effects.
Thank you, Vesna and Vedran, both for this explanation. I see Jovana as well raising her hand.
Yes, if I may, I'll also take a few small advantage of also enhancing my knowledge and hopefully also to the benefit of colleagues in Slovenia. I was just curious about the early screening. Is there any obligation towards public engagement at that level, or is this an informal step which does not fall under the requirements? Also, I was curious about the time sensitivity and technology change sensitivity of the screening process. So, you know, any flags to be mindful around, and please let me know if I'm not clear enough. And finally, if you have any considerations to share regarding the digital solution that supports, some background information from other member states or something like that. As you know, within this project, we did quite a strong exercise of digitalizing a lot and creating GIS maps, and hopefully this will then be further maintained and transformed into a digital dynamic maps, which can indeed then further support public authorities in making decisions and be one of the tools, so to speak. So yeah, just briefly, so on the early screening, on the time sensitivity and technology change sensitivity of the screening, and on the digital solution. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will say that the obligation for screening is in our legislation is clear, and it has the obligation to involve public. So minimum 1 month is documentation is on internet, and it goes hand by hand. It's quite efficient. So in parallel of we work on the dossier, and it's 30 days on internet, and everybody can make a comments, and comments are then sent to the ministry, and they are included into the decision of screening. If there is a need, we go deeper and have also the specific meetings on it. So third question, IT and maps of sensitivities and how we go further. We have ambitious plan.
I think Vesna lost connection. And can we hear each other still? Yes, okay.
We hear you.
Okay.
Or at least I do.
Yeah, okay.
I
think it's only Vesna.
Yeah, I can also take advantage. She's back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. Back and lost. Maybe Vedran, you go ahead until we have Vesna back.
I can try. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what Jovana said, and the way I understand it, this last part, the sensitivity of, how the screening takes into account the technology involvement. Was that something like, because that triggered my memory of some discussions that we had, in particular in the fast evolving field of the wind turbines, where you have a screening and even an appropriate assessment for a typical project which employs a certain wind turbine, of a certain height, rotor, diameter, and so on. And by the time that the permit is, granted, and that the project got all other permits, which can take years then, and that it's finally implemented, you cannot buy anymore that wind turbine. That's the situation we have seen. You can buy only better, bigger, and larger turbines. And then the project is forced to to be modified, but then it's like I said earlier, it's a modification of the project, should go again at least through the screening, and that can delay things. How to deal with these things? There are some ways, maybe. I don't think we provided some specific guidance, but it could be, for example, foreseen that while you're submitting a project, you can also leave the possibility or ask for the screening for expected characteristics of a turbine which may come in few years.
Yeah.
For example, leaving, asking for, an assessment of 10 meters higher and 10 meters wider turbine. It's not easy to do this in practice, I know, but it could maybe be possible and have some benefits to avoid delays later if you change the technology and so on. But it can also be done through a quick screening later. So it's up to the authority and developer to see what works best.
We were just discussing about this. Sorry, I was out and in. That it will be very useful if everybody for screening can also present the official technical, I will say, information about the projects, about turbines, about the power, and about noise and so on, because it will help. For a quick screening. This is what we found out in our screenings, that we will add this need for more exact information, and we have values of screening for 5 years. In these 5 years, if this doesn't happen, they have to come back.
And Vesna, maybe if we circulate back to the question that Jovana had, I think you started explaining the third point with regards to the action program.
Yes, I wanted to explain, how this study will be used. This means that we will prepare an action plan and strategic environmental assessment. This is the first, but I also wanted to explain that we further want to upgrade the assessment system so that it will be more electronic, everything in electronic format. And we have additional project now, which is under the program for adaptation. This means electronic communication and electronic screenings and AR with appropriate assessment, so that we will try to format them as much as possible to have more efficient, quick procedures. Was it the question, or did I miss something, because your voice was also, I hear something but not everything. Jovana, did I answer?
Yeah, yes, I think it's been a little bit of a combination of input, but yes, I mean, I also, my questions were, to be honest, more focused on perhaps Vedran's ideas around so the last one was the digital part, which you've just mentioned, that you've planned to do an action plan and improve the methodology. But my question was if there was any, takeaways from other systems on this further dynamic maps, how the data is regularly fed into them, how this is, managed across the different stakeholders. Do the stakeholders have the possibility, for example, to input data themselves directly, or it's centralized? Is there, any useful which come to mind? I realize that this is a question which could open a full other discussion, but it was just, as you mentioned it, as a really useful tool for doing the strategic environmental assessment and the screening and so on. I thought that, it would be interesting to perhaps a little bit expand on that, especially because this project gives a basis, and hopefully Slovenia will continue with the active use and update of these GIS layers.
Yes, thank you for this. We expect that in the final report, this will also be idea how to do it further, and we will use this idea. We intend to use it but the project of digitalization, we will try to involve also this in our overall project of digitalization within the ministry. Environmental Directorate is having EA and CEA, two projects. So how to improve the linkage with different layers. Here we have to solve also the problem who will fill and upgrade certain layers and how this will be connected. This is a huge work, and we have to talk with the energy sector about it. This is for the future. I don't think it's for today. Yeah.
Vedran, you wanted to respond?
It's just something that what Jovana said, and of course, as you said, once you start talking about this, you just open up a lot of other questions. But it's linked to this cumulative impact, which often gives a lot of headache to the authorities. Well, first methodologically, or even how to put all this in one place, the data in GIS databases. That's one thing, one type of challenges. Another type of challenges is the lack of data on the impact of individual projects as a consequence of monitoring, because often what the scientists tell us, well, there are all these projects in space, wind farms, and we have no idea what is their individual impact after they have been built, because there is no often a strong monitoring requirement. Sometimes it's mandated by EU law, sometimes it's not. You can have projects which can, under EU law, at least EIA or Habitats Directive, there is not mandatory to have monitoring requirement and to report it to anybody. So it's slowly becoming a challenge. What do we know about the impact of all these hundreds of wind farms in space to say something about cumulative impacts? And that's becoming a bottleneck, a problem, the lack of monitoring obligation and data to be reported to a central authority or who anybody. And yeah, that's something that, of course, every country needs to find a way to deal with. I know, for example, I think France has mandated that also, any type of reports from the operators, from the monitoring, should be sent to the Central Nature Authority, because that's the way they collect also biodiversity information and can be useful for many other things. So there are ways that the authorities can request, mandate, and use this type of data. It's true that it would often require some reorganization of rules at the national level, and of course developers don't like any additional obligation, but it's becoming a problem, and we don't know much about the current impacts of some individual projects, and without this information we cannot assess cumulative impacts. So it's another thing that will need to be done nationally, and well, let's see, even at the EU level.
Yeah, thank you for this. Just for addition, we are planning to have a separate map also with all project, with project areas and project coordinated, so that we already have it, but as internal layer. But we will try to do also that others will can see, and then they can assess cumulative effect better. And for the monitoring, we already have in legislation possibility. If monitoring is needed, we can add it into the decision, and then the additional monitoring can be done. Yeah. But for now, we have no experiences for wind. We hope that, yeah, we know monitorings from Croatia and Spain, and yeah, so that we know which species are the most sensitive. This is important for information and we believe that more EU exchange is also needed on this field.
Okay, I don't see any other raised hand from the audience, so maybe I would ask again if there's anyone that would like to join. Kakšno vprašanje za Vedrana? Is publike. Yeah. Seems like we exhausted all the participants and there are no questions anymore. Tomasz.
So I will step in. Jan, thank you for moderating this. I would really like to thank to all of the speakers and those who have been participating on this very interesting debate through, or I would even say debates throughout the day and then also through the previous sessions. I also would like to thank the participants for listening in and for actively participating in the polls. And as a reflection of today's topic, we have prepared again an online polling through Menti. So if we may ask you to again log into the Menti site with the code that you see on your screen, you can again use your mobile phones while scanning the barcode and answer a couple of questions that would help us to learn your feedback, reflections, and also needs for further trainings.
So maybe, Tomasz, I'll leave it on for additional 10 seconds and then we can see the results.
And we can comment.
Yes.
So here we go. I mean, based on the results, we see 10 people logged in, 8 people casted their votes. Looks like the most exciting, I would even say, was the screening according to the Habitats Directive. But looks like everything was exciting. We have 9 votes. You can still log in. Down you see both the site, also the code to log in.
Okay, so maybe we move to the second part.
Yes, I think yes, for the sake of the time, yes. And what are the topics that you would like to learn further? We'll give you again 1 more minute to type in your answers.
Yeah, this one is open-ended, so it might take a minute or two for the participants.
Okay, so now the results are coming. It looks like the responses keep a bit repeating. So best practices. This is what interests you most, and you never have enough. Cumulative impacts. Criteria. Any comments from your side? The people online, in person. I believe that with some best practices, we will still hear it in the upcoming sessions. And as I said, there are never enough examples of the good practice. So that will for sure be included in our recommendations for the next trainings. But thank you for 13 answers. That's very nice feedback and food for thought for further improvements. And I think with this, we are coming slowly to an end. So if I would like to, yes. So I would like to invite you for the 2 remaining training sessions that are ahead of us. So we have scheduled for next week, Wednesday, and next week, Thursday, sessions that will again provide you with an overview of the procedures, permitting procedures for renewables, and then how to work with the habitat directives and its requirements according to the Article 6. So this is a standard curriculum that will be repeated on 2 days. And as of focus topic, so topics that will be changed in each of the day. On Wednesday, we have, how is it in English, presojazd spravedlivosti.
Appropriate assessment.
Appropriate assessment, thank you. And on Thursday, we do have the overriding public interest and edit also the cultural heritage. Topics will be presented again by the representatives of the European Commissions. For the discussions, we will also have the experts from the Czech Republic, from Austria, joining. These were delivering trainings in the previous session. So you will have again the opportunity to ask them specific questions from their countries they come from, and possibly also beyond. Therefore, please, if you will have time, dial in or come in person. And with this one, again, I would like to thank you for the participation. Again, thank you very much to Vedran. Thank you very much to Jan for facilitating today's discussion. And I think we can close this session with the wish of a nice weekend ahead of us, and with the hope to see you next week.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hvala vsem.
Hvala
Thank you very
vsem.
much.
Ja,
Bye.
lepo bodite, lep
Bye.
vikend. Dio.
Ja.